This is my interactive read aloud number 1 reflection. Introduction. The standard I chose for this particular lesson was CCSS ELA Literacy Reading Literature 4.1, which is refer to details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. I chose this particular standard because my students are working on summarizing, and part of the work that they're doing with summarizing text is to cite evidence. The reading strategy that I felt directly related to this standard was reading goal 5.16, summarizing with somebody wanted but and so. I chose that reading strategy because it helps students to scaffold students as they are summarizing, so they identify who the main character is, what the main character wanted, what the conflict the main character was going through, and how it was solved. The learning objective for this standard and reading strategy is students will be able to refer to details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. So I had the students do this and scaffold it as we were talking and identifying each part of the somebody wanted but and so of the story and citing evidence, so telling me where in the text it tells them that this is who the main character is. So was this text culturally responsive text? So the first thing we have in the cultural responsive text checklist is agency. So this is where we're talking about the main characters and the conflicts in the story. So the conflict in the story is that the main character, Ray, wants to buy moccasins for his grandfather, but he only has $28.67. Ray remembers that the sign on the moccasins said $50 or best offer, so he decides to make an offer of $28.67. However, when he gets to the store, another person makes an offer of $30. Then a large wind blows through the store and knocks over a basket of antique buttons. And so then Ray sees this as another opportunity to make a different offer. And so he offers $28.67 and to pick up all of the antique buttons that fell on the floor. However, the antique shop owner decides that not to take Ray's offer and instead takes the lady's offer of $30. Ray is a little disheartened, but as he's leaving the antique store, he decides to make an offer to the lady who bought the moccasins, and he offers to trade her for his shoes, his high tops with neon orange shoelaces. And he tells her, like, I don't know who made these, but I know they're definitely Indian worn. And so she decides to take him up on his offer. So she trades him, and he gives the moccasins to his grandfather, and the lady who originally bought the moccasins puts Ray's shoes in a display in the library with a card that reads, traded from Ray Halfmoon, Cherokee Seminole high tops, not Indian made, but Indian worn, guaranteed. The characters who change in the story are Ray and his grandfather and the librarian who bought the moccasins. Ray makes decisions, and so does the librarian and the antique shop owner. The antique shop owner's interests are definitely served, and so is the librarian, but Ray is able to negotiate with her. This story shows, I think this story could be used to show and demonstrate the subtlety of cultural appropriation that a lot of Indigenous people have had to deal with in regards to museums and antique shops, such as the one that Ray and his grandfather went into, um, where they own a lot of cultural paraphernalia that doesn't necessarily belong to them. And so, and is only accessible to um, non native people who have money to purchase those items. Um, And in this story, too, we see the dynamic of the antique shop owner. He could have taken Ray's offer, which was only $1.33 less than the librarian's offer, but he chose not to, um, which shows that the antique shop owner, doesn't understand his privilege or know his privilege and see how that affects someone like Ray and his grandfather. However, the librarian um, does understand after Ray gives her his offer of trading his shoes for the moccasins. She realizes how important the moccasins are to Ray and to his grandfather. And so she decides to take him up on his offer. Um, I think this speech or the language in the story um, also added to the significance of um, the English fluency is important because, and it's represented more realistically as a tool because Ray and his grandfather are living in an urban area. And you could definitely use this story to segue into discussions about the Relocation Act of 1956 and the effect that it had on his grandfather and him, um, as well as other Indigenous people who were relocated to urban areas across the country for work or for the promise of work, um, as well as land appropriation. Um, when I introduce this story, I talk about land acknowledgement of that the city of Chicago was original homelands to many indigenous nations prior to it being settled by Western colonialists. Um, let's see. So that's the checklist for the cultural relevancy. Um, Demonstrating knowledge of students, NM Teach 1E. Um, this lesson explicitly addresses my students' background. All my students represent one or more of the 75 Indigenous nations present at our school. There are not many books and stories that represent our Indigenous boys, so I felt this book was significant to show that my Indigenous male students are represented in stories that we read. Oftentimes, there are more books and stories with Indigenous females as the main characters. This book contains some words that are above the fourth grade academic language level. This story was also chosen because during our discussion about Rock Your Mocks Day, which is a day where everyone shows pride in who they are and where they come from by wearing their moccasins that day. And when we talked about a reminder that, oh yeah, Rock Your Mocks Day is on Monday, and this was on a Friday before the weekend, many of my students expressed that they had outgrown their moccasins, that their moccasins were at their grandparents' house or they didn't own any. And so Reading this story helped them to see that Indian shoes are not necessarily moccasins, but also other shoes that they wear are Indian worn, and therefore they're Indian shoes as well. Um, I also show pictures in the lesson of other um, high tops that have been beaded or painted, um, that are considered in Indian shoes. I also felt that this book would be a great opportunity to do some land acknowledgement with the students and discuss, um, like I said, how Chicago was the indigenous homelands of many indigenous nations. I felt that and so that was my connection to their culture, their background, their interest, um, as well as the learning objective of citing evidence from the story to as they summarize. Communicating with students in a manner appropriate to their culture and development. I feel that the content was delivered in a clear and concise manner and demonstrated my understanding of the content as well as my students. This lesson was written to be used with my students during distance learning, so I chose to use the learning platform of Nearpod to make the read aloud interactive. With Nearpod, the students can type their responses to questions, and as they post them, I can read them to the class. The students can also like each other's comments and discuss. Students can also click on maps and pictures of Chicago and click on the editable PDF file for the so, what, but, so, then summary. The video of my lesson was not done with my students, but I think the understanding of the opportunities to collaborate are present and observable in the video. Reflecting on teaching, NM Teach 4C. So strengths, challenges, and changes. I feel like the strengths of this lesson was the connection to my students and their experiences, their culture, and their languages. I feel the challenges of this lesson was the timing, that I only had 15 minutes to do a video of this whole lesson, and the environment, because it was I wanted to be able to use this lesson with my actual students. So I made it accessible for distance learning, which it was a challenge, or it is a challenge. So my lesson was longer than 15 minutes, and what I am finding as I'm teaching during distance learning is that a lesson that typically would have taken me 15 to 20 minutes in a normal physical classroom is taking me twice as long in distance learning. So oftentimes my lessons are broken into smaller parts, like smaller mini lessons. So that's something that I would change. I think it's difficult many times to condense lessons, um, and because I don't want it, I felt like every part of the lesson was important and significant, and I didn't want to take any of them out in order to condense the lesson. So what I would do with this lesson is I would break it into smaller parts and pieces, and maybe read the story at least 3 times with the students, but focusing on different parts from the lesson. I feel overall this was a very well planned lesson. Um, like I said, I would break it into smaller parts. I also would include, and that wasn't, I don't think that wasn't as observable in the video because I didn't have actual students that I was doing the lesson with, is the use of equity sticks or because we use packs, what they're called pack sticks, where I would, pick sticks to call on different students to answer the questions in the discussion or collaboration boards on the Nearpod side. And that is the end of my reflection. Thank you.